Hey everyone, it's Richard from BrandNewNoise. Just wanted to walk you through a few quick steps to troubleshoot your BrandNewNoise instrument or audio recorder. So let's get started. When it comes time to change your batteries in your BrandNewNoise instrument or audio recorder, we recommend a high quality brand new set of batteries. Panasonic, Duracell, Energizer, even Kirkland. We do not recommend using an off-brand battery. They leak and tend to cause problems, so let's not even go there. First sign that you have battery problems, you've got zero playback, no static, no sound, absolutely nothing. Let's start by changing out the batteries. 2, static. If your playback has static over it, or it starts to fuzz out, static is introduced, and then cuts off abruptly, the batteries most likely need changing. 3, if you can barely hear your instrument, let's start with a fresh set of batteries. So let's head over to the workbench and walk through the process.
You'll need just a regular Phillips head screwdriver, a number 2 Phillips head, or a number 2 bit for your drill. If you are using a drill, make sure that your torque is set between 3 and 5, so when you replace the screws when you're done, you don't overdrive them into the unit. I like to start by taking the top right screw and the 2 bottom screws out. That way we can just slide the lid open while we do the work, and when we're done, it's an easy replacement to just close it back up. So let's take these out. Slide that baby open, and there we are. Before we get to changing the batteries, let's listen to the death rattle. If you hear this sound, most likely your box has been dropped, thrown, kicked, whatever. That means the batteries have been knocked out. So after removing the 3 screws, open it up and you will find your batteries are loose and rattling around in there. That's why it's dead. So just simply put your batteries back into the battery pack. Make sure they're in the correct direction. Put the lid back on, put the tape back on, and you should be back in full record mode. All right, so let's get to changing the batteries. Here's your battery pack. It's glued into place, and we're just going to need to remove the tape and slide the lid off. So the lid comes off, it'll slide to the left, just like this. It's got 2 tabs, one on the end there and one on the top. That keeps it locked into place. And then you might need to move the red wires occasionally to allow the space for the lid to come off. You'll see that little gap there. It's made just to get the lid off. So the hardest part is actually getting the tape off. Just take your time, removing the tape. It may tear, that's okay. Just keep prying it off all the way from the back. And then there we are. Get the wires out of the way and slide that lid to the left. Voila. Now, remove these batteries. You can use a little small screwdriver or just pop them out with your hand, whatever's easiest. The thing you want to note when replacing the batteries, your positive and your negative. Make sure your negative, the flat side, the negative flat side goes towards the spring. So when you're replacing the batteries, always put the negative flat side to the spring. And before you close it up, just make sure you test it. So it's working like a champ. Now let's get that lid back on. Slide it back into the place to the right. And I usually just use the old tape, or you could use a new piece of tape. Get that lid back on there. This just keeps it from popping off in case it's dropped or banged around. And just like that, you got new batteries in. You are good to go.
Before we jump into replacing parts over at the workbench, let's take a look at what you'll see inside when you open up the back of your BrandNewNoise. This is your PCB, your printed circuit board. We will go over in detail in a separate video of exactly how this board works and what it does. Today we're just focusing on troubleshooting and replacing parts. So you'll notice that you've got color-coded sockets here. These are solderless connections. That means you need no soldering equipment or soldering skill. Each color-coded part here will match its component on your BrandNewNoise instrument. This large red socket is for your battery pack. Most of you will have this empty red socket. That is correct. That is for another application, which we will go over in a different video. The green is your switch. The yellow will be your black playback button. Purple will be your red record button. The black socket will be your microphone. The small white socket will be for your potentiometer or your pot. The blue is your speaker. And last but not least, the large white is your stereo output jack.
Let's take a quick look at how the component will actually plug into the socket on the PCB. Each component has a little plug there. You can see a ridge on that plug. That ridge will match up with a corresponding slot. So for the demonstration, we'll plug the green into the white so you can clearly see it. You're going to take that little ridge there, match it up to the slot, and then just press it into place with your fingers, nice and secure into the PCB. You can do that either with your fingers or with a pair of pliers. Same for removing it. Take pliers, just slowly wiggle it and pull till it comes out like that. And that's it. Just a simple plug and play process.
Switch. If your switch on your unit does not move, if it does not toggle like this, then that switch will need to be replaced. It's a very simple replacement job. So let's head over to the workbench and walk through the process.
Again, if it does not toggle, if it's jammed, this will need to be replaced. So to replace it, you'll need an 8mm socket or a 5/16 wrench. Either one of those will work. We're just going to remove that front nut there off of the switch. Get it started, and then I just do it by hand. Now on the inside of the unit, you can just pull that part out. Then we'll set the box on its side, make it a little easier removing the plug from the socket. So take your needle nose pliers and gently wiggle until it comes loose. Voila. Putting that switch back in there. It is specific. It will fit nice and snug in its pocket. They all have pockets, so it's correctly oriented and so that it doesn't move if it gets loose, doesn't spin around. So you're just going to slide that through the hole back into the pocket. Now, this is specific. You want to make sure the wires are to the left. The switch has 3 solder lugs. One lug is empty, that will remain to the right, and the 2 soldered wires will go to the left. Beyonce, to the left, to the left. So, back into its slot, into the pocket, and then I like to hold it in the pocket with my thumb to keep it nice and tight while I go around to the front side to hand tighten that nut back on. So, hand tighten. And then once it's on there, take your socket or your wrench and just give it a few turns, nice and tight against the wood. Don't over torque it. Now to plug it back in, put the box on its side. You're going to make sure that the ridge on the plug fits into the slot in the socket. Press it nice and firm. Double check that everything is working correctly.
Checking 1, 2, checking 1, 2.
Booyah kabooyah, and you're back to making some noise.
Knobs. The knobs on your BrandNewNoise instruments should rotate only between 4 and 7 o'clock. That means from 4 around to 7 o'clock. It does not go all the way around. If your BrandNewNoise knob turns all the way around or is loose or rattles, then we will need to tighten that potentiometer. That is simple process of slipping off the knob, tightening the nut underneath, and then replacing the knob. So let's head over to the workbench and take a look.
If your knob rattles around like this, or if it moves beyond the 7 and the 4 o'clock range, if it rotates 360 degrees, then we'll either need to replace that part completely or just tighten the nut. You can see the nut underneath there. So we'll have to take off the knob, but looking on the inside, you see that the potentiometer fits in a pocket. That pocket looks like this and is designed specifically for that part. That way the potentiometer sits nice and snug in its pocket if the nut is properly tightened. So let's start by removing the knob. I use a flat file, any flat object to help you get your fingers underneath that knob, and then just slowly pull, gently pull it off of the shaft of the potentiometer, like so. You can see it's just a push-on part. Now let's just check to make sure the unit is properly working. So we see that it is working properly. Now all we need to do is just tighten that nut and get the pot back in place. Just making sure it's properly set in the pocket. Again, I put some pressure with my finger to keep that pot in place while I hand tighten the nut with my fingers. And then you'll take your 10 millimeter socket, or you can use an adjustable wrench, and just tighten that down. Again, don't over torque it, just nice and tight against the wood. Make sure the part is actually snug in the pocket from the back. Now, to get that knob back on, we're going to rotate that potentiometer counterclockwise until it stops. So your little split shaft will be on a diagonal towards the 7 o'clock. Now, you'll take your knob and the indicator dial, the white line, you're going to line up with that split shaft on the diagonal, and then just slowly press, gently press the knob back onto that shaft until it's properly seated, all the way down, like that. And there we go. No more wobble. It operates between 4 and 7 like it should, and we're back in action. So if you open up the back and your potentiometer has been spinning and the wires are twisted, and or you see a loose wire like this, you should have 2 wires connected to your pot from that white socket. So it should look like that. If you've got a loose wire, we're either going to need to remove the pot and resolder it back to the solder lug, or replace the potentiometer completely. To do that, we're going to repeat that same process. We're going to remove the knob first, then remove the nut, and then we're going to push this part through. Now this will take a little bit of elbow grease to wiggle it out from behind the battery pack. It will come out. Just keep wiggling and prying until you get it loose and completely out. And then with your fingers and or some needle nose pliers, work the plug out of its socket, just gently side to side, slowly pry it out, like so. Now we can replace that part. So remember, on your plug of your potentiometer, make sure its notch matches the slot of the socket. You can take a second and make sure all the parts, the components, are nice and snug on the PCB. And then work that potentiometer back into its pocket behind the battery pack. Tighten the nut by hand until you get it all the way down. Take your 10 millimeter wrench to fully tighten it, and then test it out. Working like a champ. And now let's get the knob back on. So rotate the shaft counterclockwise until it stops. The split shaft should be at 7 o'clock on the diagonal. We'll take your knob and the indicator notch, the white line, and line it up with that split shaft on the diagonal, and then slowly press it back down onto the shaft. It should be operating from between 7 and 4 o'clock. Should be no wobble.
Checking 1, 2.
Working, and we're back in action.
All BrandNewNoise instruments are equipped with a 1/8 or 3.5 millimeter stereo output. First, The output is not a live line out. That means when you're playing your instrument, it will not output the live audio. It will only output your recording. It will only output the sample that you have recorded onto your device. Now, stereo. That means it has a left and a right channel. For it to work properly, you need a stereo cable. Your stereo cable looks like this. It has two rings, a left and a right ring. If you have a cable that is mono, it has one ring and looks like this. This will not work properly. If you have a 3-ring cable, you see this? With a left and a right audio, the 3rd ring is for video. This cable will work, but I recommend using a proper stereo cable for your output. Let's take a quick second to talk about power consumption. You've noticed that there is no on or off switch on your BrandNewNoise. So that means if you are not using it, if you're not playing with it, it is in standby mode and not consuming power. In standby mode, you've got about 5 years of life in the battery, which essentially is the life of the battery itself. So it will last forever in standby mode. In run mode, when you're using the power, you're using about 20 to 50 milliamps. So what that means is you've got about 20 to 50 hours of runtime before you'll need to change your 2 AAA batteries. So just keep that in mind. There is no on or off switch. When you're not playing with it, it is not using power. The exception to the rule is making sure that on your piano, you've got a record switch. If it is in record mode, it is consuming power. You will need to shut it off to get playback, but also make sure you don't walk away with it in record mode or it will drain your batteries. Same is true for the drum. Make sure that your drum, you've got a 1 and a 0. Make sure it is in record mode when it is on the 1. You will need to put it at 0 for playback. Make sure it remains at 0 when you're done playing with your instrument.